On Valentine's night in a half-empty Denver diner, Caleb Morgan sat nursing a $2 coffee he couldn't afford to refill, counting minutes until he could get home to his daughter. When the woman in the booth behind him whispered 6 words that made a stranger walk out and leave her sobbing into her hands. "My son is dying of cancer." What Caleb did next would shatter both their carefully built walls, pull 2 broken families into one fragile circle, and prove that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the courage to sit down beside someone else's grief. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below and hit that like button. I want to see how far this story travels, because what happens next will break your heart and put it back together in ways you won't expect. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and fryer grease, the kind of place that survived on late-night desperation rather than ambition. Caleb Morgan sat in a corner booth with his hands wrapped around a chipped mug, watching the clock above the counter tick toward 9:30. He'd already been there 40 minutes, killing time he didn't really have, but couldn't bear to spend anywhere else. Home meant an empty apartment where every surface reminded him he was doing this alone. Work meant the auto shop where he'd spent 12 hours flat on his back under transmissions that leaked and engines that knocked, his spine screaming and his hands so stiff he could barely turn the key in his own ignition. And actually going out on Valentine's Day, like he had plans or prospects, that wasn't even a possibility worth considering. So he sat, alone. Drinking coffee he'd have to make last another 20 minutes before the waitress started giving him looks. Caleb was 31, but felt older. His face carried the kind of exhaustion that came from years of sleeping 4 hours a night and waking up already behind. His hands were scarred and calloused, knuckles perpetually bruised from wrenches that slipped and bolts that fought back. His jeans had a hole in the knee he kept meaning to patch. His flannel shirt was clean but worn soft from too many washes, and his boots were the steel-toed kind that said he worked with his body because he didn't have the luxury of working with anything else. He wasn't ugly. Women had told him that before, back when he'd been young enough to believe compliments might lead somewhere. He had dark hair that fell a little too long over his forehead, deep-set brown eyes that looked black in certain light, and the kind of build that came from lifting heavy things for a living. But none of that mattered when you were a single father working 60-hour weeks just to keep the lights on. The door chimed. Caleb glanced up out of habit, the way people do in public spaces when their mind is somewhere else. A woman walked in, mid-30s, dark hair pulled into a neat ponytail, wearing a charcoal dress that looked too nice for this place. She scanned the room with the nervous precision of someone meeting a stranger, then slid into the booth directly behind Caleb's. He went back to his coffee. 5 minutes later, the door chimed again. Caleb didn't look up this time, but he heard the footsteps, confident, quick, the sound of dress shoes on linoleum. A man's voice, smooth and practiced, floated over the divider between booths. "Tessa?" "Grant?" The woman's voice was softer, careful. "Hi. Yes. Nice to meet you." "Likewise." The sound of sliding vinyl as Grant sat down. "Sorry, I'm a few minutes late. Traffic on I-25 was a nightmare." "No problem. I just got here myself." Caleb shifted slightly, trying not to listen but unable to avoid it. The booths were close, the diner too quiet. The couple behind him might as well have been sitting at his table. "So," Grant said, his tone warming into something rehearsed. "Tessa Lane, marketing consultant, runner, dog person. I have to say, your profile undersold you." Tessa laughed, a small, polite sound. "I could say the same. You didn't mention you were in finance." "Guilty. Wealth management, specifically." I know, not the sexiest profession, but it pays the bills." "There are worse things." "True. Like being a poet or a philosophy major." They both laughed. The waitress came by, took their orders, wine for her, bourbon for him, appetizers to split. The conversation rolled into easy territory. Work, hobbies, the best hiking trails outside Denver, opinions on whether Casa Bonita was worth the hype. Grant had the kind of charm that came from practice, the smooth patter of a man who knew how to make himself appealing without revealing much. Tessa responded in kind, her voice light but guarded, like she was performing a role she'd rehearsed but didn't quite believe in. Caleb found himself listening more than he meant to. Not because he cared about their hiking preferences, but because something about Tessa's voice made him pay attention. There was a tightness in it, a careful control, like she was holding something fragile and couldn't let it slip. "So," Grant said after a lull, his tone shifting into something more personal. "I have to ask, and feel free to tell me it's too soon, but why is someone like you still single? I mean, you're smart, successful, clearly put together. What's the catch?" Tessa hesitated. Caleb could hear it in the silence, the pause that stretched just a beat too long. "No catch," she said finally. "Just life. Things don't always work out the way you plan." "Fair enough, but you're not one of those women with a mile-long checklist, are you? Because I've met a few of those, and let me tell you, I'm not." "Good. Because honestly, I think people overcomplicate this stuff. You meet someone, you see if there's chemistry, you take it from there. No need to overthink it." "Right." Another pause. The waitress came back, dropped off drinks and a basket of mozzarella sticks. Silverware clinked. Ice rattled in glasses. Caleb stared at his coffee, willing himself to stop listening, but he couldn't make himself move. There was something building in the conversation behind him, something he couldn't name but could feel. "So what about you?" Tessa asked. "Why are you still single?" "Honestly, I was married, divorced 3 years ago. No kids, thank God. That would have made it messier. She wanted different things. I wanted, I don't know, freedom, I guess. The ability to make my own choices without checking in with someone every 5 minutes. That makes sense." "What about you? Ever been married?" "No?" "Kids?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Caleb heard Tessa's breath catch, just barely, before she answered. "I have a son." Grant's tone didn't change, but something in the air did. "Oh, how old?" "He's 5. 5. Wow, that's young." Grant took a sip of his bourbon. "So you're co-parenting? How's that working out?" "It's complicated." "Complicated how?" Tessa's voice dropped, and Caleb had to strain to hear her. "His father isn't in the picture. It's just me." "Okay. So you're doing the single mom thing. That's a lot." "It is." Grant cleared his throat. "I'm not going to lie, Tessa. That's not something I was expecting. I mean, your profile didn't mention." "I know." "Why not?" Caleb heard Tessa set her glass down, the soft clink of it against the table. When she spoke, her voice was quieter, thinner, like she was pulling it up from somewhere deep. "Because most men hear single mother, and that's the end of the conversation. And I get it, I do. It's a lot to take on. But I thought, maybe if someone got to know me first before they knew about Eli, it might be different." "Eli. That's his name?" "Yes." Grant sighed. "Look, I appreciate the honesty. I do. But you have to understand, from my perspective, dating someone with a kid it's a package deal, and I'm not sure I'm ready for that, especially with someone I just met." "I understand." "Do you have full custody?" "Yes." "So you're juggling work and a 5-year-old on your own. When do you even have time to date?" Tessa didn't answer right away. Caleb could hear her breathing, slow and controlled, like she was counting to 10 in her head. "I make time," she said finally. "Right. But here's the thing, and I don't mean this harshly, but I think it's important to be upfront. I'm looking for something uncomplicated, someone I can travel with, do spontaneous things with. A kid makes that harder." "I know. And kids are expensive. I'm not trying to be crass, but that's a reality. Childcare, activities, school, it adds up. And if things got serious between us, that would affect me too." Caleb's jaw tightened. He stared into his coffee, his hands curling into fists around the mug. "I'm not asking you to pay for anything," Tessa said quietly. "I didn't come here expecting that." "I know you didn't. I'm just saying, it's a factor." There was a long silence. Caleb could feel the weight of it pressing through the vinyl divider between them. "Can I ask you something?" Tessa's voice was steadier now, but there was an edge to it. "If I didn't have a son, would this conversation be going differently?" Grant hesitated. "Probably, yeah. That's what I thought." "Tessa, look, I'm not trying to be a jerk here. I'm just being honest. And I think you'd rather have honesty than some guy who strings you along and then bails 6 months in, right? Right. So maybe this just isn't a good fit. No hard feelings. No hard feelings. Grant shifted in the booth. Caleb heard the rustle of a jacket being pulled on, the scrape of a wallet being retrieved. I'll cover the drinks, Grant said. And hey, I hope you find what you're looking for. I really do. Tessa didn't respond. Take care, okay? The booth creaked as Grant stood. His footsteps crossed the diner, quick and purposeful, and then the door chimed and he was gone. Caleb sat frozen, staring at the table. Behind him, Tessa was silent. He could hear her breathing, shallow, controlled, like she was trying very hard not to fall apart. Then he heard the soft, muffled sound of a sob being swallowed, and the faint rustle of hands covering a face. He should leave. He should finish his coffee, pay his bill, and walk out without looking back. This wasn't his business. He didn't know this woman. He had his own life, his own problems, and getting involved in someone else's heartbreak was the last thing he needed. But he didn't move, because he knew that sound. He knew what it was like to sit alone in a public place and try to hold yourself together while everything inside you screamed. He knew what it was like to be dismissed, to be seen as too much or not enough, to carry a weight so heavy that other people flinched when they saw it. Caleb set his mug down. He pulled a $5 bill from his wallet, more than the coffee cost, but he didn't care, and left it on the table. Then he stood, turned, and looked at the woman in the booth behind him. Tessa Lane had her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Her untouched wine glass sat in front of her, the condensation already pooling around the base. She looked small, folded in on herself, like she was trying to disappear. Caleb stepped around the divider and stood at the edge of her booth. "Excuse me." Tessa's head jerked up. Her eyes were red, her mascara smudged, her expression a mix of humiliation and alarm. I'm sorry, Don't apologize." Caleb gestured to the empty seat across from her. "Would it be okay if I sat down?" She stared at him, confused. "Why?" "Because you shouldn't be alone right now." Tessa blinked, her breath hitching. "You were listening." "I was." Caleb didn't try to soften it. "I didn't mean to, but I did. And I heard what that guy said to you, and I think he's an asshole." A startled laugh broke through her tears. "You don't even know me." "No, but I know what it sounds like when someone gets kicked while they're already down. And I know what it feels like." He paused. "So if you want me to leave, I will. But if you want some company, no expectations, no agenda, I've got nowhere else to be." Tessa looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face like she was trying to figure out if this was real or some kind of cruel joke. Finally, she nodded. Caleb slid into the booth across from her. Up close, he could see the exhaustion etched into her features, the dark circles under her eyes, the tightness in her jaw, the way her hands trembled slightly as she reached for a napkin to wipe her face. "I'm Caleb," he said. "Tessa." She managed a weak smile. "I guess you already knew that." "Yeah, sorry." "It's fine." She crumpled the napkin in her hands. "God, this is humiliating." "It's not." "It is. Getting dumped on a blind date is bad enough. Getting dumped on Valentine's Day is worse. Getting dumped because I have a kid." Her voice broke. She looked away, blinking hard. Caleb waited. He didn't try to fill the silence with platitudes or reassurances. He just sat, his hands resting on the table, and let her take her time. "He didn't even ask about Eli," Tessa said, finally. "He didn't ask what he's like or what he's into or anything. He just calculated, like Eli was a liability on a balance sheet. Some people are like that. Most people are like that." Tessa's laugh was bitter. "You should have seen the look on his face when I told him, like I just confessed to a crime. He's an idiot. Maybe. Or maybe he's just honest. Maybe everyone else is thinking the same thing. They're just polite enough not to say it." "I don't think that's true." Tessa looked at him, her eyes sharp despite the tears. "You don't know me. You don't know my life." "You're right. I don't." Caleb leaned back against the booth. "But I know what it's like to be a single parent, and I know what it's like when people treat that like it's some kind of character flaw." Tessa's expression shifted. "You have a kid?" "A daughter, Mia. She's 8. Where's her mom? Dead. The word came out flat, matter of fact. She died giving birth to Mia. Complications. Tessa's face crumpled. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Caleb shook his head. Don't. I didn't tell you to make you feel bad. I told you because I get it. The looks, the judgments, the people who hear single parent and assume you're broken or desperate or too much work. I've been living that for 8 years. Tessa stared at him, and for the first time since he'd sat down, the tightness in her face eased just a little. Does it get easier? No. Caleb met her gaze. But you get stronger. They sat in silence for a moment. The waitress passed by, glanced at them, and kept walking. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in harsh, unforgiving white. Can I ask you something? Tessa said quietly. Yeah. Why are you doing this? Why did you come over here? Caleb considered the question. He could have given her a dozen different answers, politeness, pity, boredom, but none of them would have been true. Because 8 years ago, I was sitting in a hospital cafeteria at 3 a.m. holding a newborn I didn't know how to take care of, and a nurse sat down next to me and asked if I wanted to talk. I said no. She stayed anyway, didn't say much, just sat there drinking coffee while I fell apart, and when I was done falling apart, she told me something I've never forgotten. What did she say? She said, "You're going to survive this, and someday you're going to sit down next to someone else who's falling apart, and you're going to do for them what I'm doing for you. That's how this works." Caleb's voice was quiet, steady. So that's why I'm here. Because someone did it for me, and because you look like you needed it. Tessa's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they spilled over. She didn't try to stop them. She just let them fall, her hands pressed flat against the table, her breath coming in shaky gasps. He's dying, she whispered. Caleb went very still. Who? Eli. My son. Tessa's voice broke on his name. He has brain cancer, glioblastoma, stage 4. They gave him 6 months, and that was 4 months ago. The words hung in the air like smoke. Caleb felt them settle in his chest, heavy and cold. Jesus, he said softly. He's in hospice now. Home hospice. I turned my apartment into a medical ward, oxygen tanks, monitors, a hospital bed in the living room. He can't walk anymore. He can barely talk. And She stopped, her hands shaking. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to watch him die. Caleb didn't have an answer for that. There wasn't one. I thought maybe... Tessa's voice was barely audible now. I thought maybe if I could just have one normal night. One night where I wasn't a hospice nurse or a grieving mother or someone people pity. I thought maybe I could pretend, just for a few hours, that my life was something other than this. But I can't, because it is this. And no one wants to be part of that. I do. Tessa looked up, startled. I'm not saying I know what to do, Caleb said. I can't fix this. I can't make it better. But if you need someone to sit with you while you figure out how to breathe through it, I can do that. Why would you do that? Because no one should have to do this alone. Tessa stared at him, her expression raw and unguarded. Then, very slowly, she nodded. They talked for the next hour, not about anything profound or life-changing, just small things. Caleb told her about Mia, about her obsession with dinosaurs, and her habit of narrating her entire day like she was hosting a nature documentary. Tessa told him about Eli, about how he used to love superheroes, and how he'd made her watch every Marvel movie at least 3 times. She talked about the little things she missed, taking him to the park, hearing him laugh, the way he used to climb into her bed at 5 a.m. and press his cold feet against her legs. Caleb listened. He didn't offer advice or try to make her feel better. He just listened, the way that Nurse had listened to him all those years ago. When the waitress finally came by to tell them the diner was closing, Tessa looked surprised. What time is it? Almost 11, Caleb said. God, I didn't realize. She stood, gathering her coat and purse. I should get home. My neighbor's been watching Eli, and she has to work in the morning. Yeah, of course. They walked out together into the cold February night. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few scattered cars under flickering streetlights. Tessa stopped beside a silver sedan, her hand on the door handle. Thank you, she said. For tonight. For everything. You don't have to thank me. I do, though. Tessa looked at him, her eyes still red, but clearer now. You didn't have to do that. And I won't forget it. Caleb pulled a pen from his pocket and scribbled his number on a napkin he'd grabbed on the way out. If you need someone to talk to, or if you just need someone to sit with you while you don't talk, call me. Tessa took the napkin, her fingers brushing his. Why are you being so kind to me? Because you deserve it. Caleb met her gaze. And because your son deserves to have a mother who doesn't have to carry this alone. Tessa's eyes filled with tears again, but she smiled through them. Okay. Okay. She got into her car and drove away, and Caleb stood in the parking lot watching her taillights disappear into the night. Then he got into his own truck, a battered Ford that rattled when he started it, and drove home to his daughter, who was asleep on the couch with the babysitter dozing in the chair beside her. He paid the sitter, carried Mia to bed, and tucked her in with her favorite stuffed triceratops. Then he sat on the edge of her bed and watched her sleep, this little person who had cost him everything and given him everything. And he thought about Tessa Lane and her dying son and the way grief could make you feel like you were drowning in a room full of air. He thought about the napkin with his number on it, sitting in Tessa's car, and wondered if she'd ever use it. 3 days later, at 2 a.m, his phone rang. Caleb woke to the sound of his phone vibrating against the nightstand, the screen's harsh glow cutting through the darkness of his bedroom. He fumbled for it, nearly knocking over a glass of water in the process, his heart already racing the way it always did when the phone rang in the middle of the night. Nothing good ever came from calls at 2 a.m. The number wasn't saved, but he recognized the area code. Denver. He answered. Hello? There was breathing on the other end, ragged and uneven, and then a voice he'd only heard once but somehow remembered perfectly. Caleb? Tessa. He sat up, fully awake now. What's wrong? I'm sorry, I know it's late. I shouldn't have called. It's fine, talk to me. What happened? There was a long pause, filled with the sound of Tessa trying to breathe through whatever was crushing her chest. When she finally spoke, her voice was so thin it barely carried through the line. He's having a bad night. Really bad. The pain meds aren't working and he keeps crying and I don't know what to do. The hospice nurse won't be here until morning and her voice cracked. I needed to hear a voice that wasn't mine. Caleb swung his legs out of bed, his feet finding the cold floor. Are you at home? Yes. Is he safe right now, like medically? I think so. His vitals are okay. It's just the pain. He can't get comfortable, and every time I move him, he screams, and I feel like I'm torturing him. You're not torturing him. You're doing everything you can. It doesn't feel like enough. Caleb walked to his window and looked out at the empty street, the streetlights casting pools of orange on the asphalt. Talk to me about something else. Anything. Just don't hang up. I don't know what to say. Tell me about Eli. Not about right now. About before. What was he like? Tessa was quiet for a moment, and then she started talking. Her voice was shaky at first, but as she spoke, it grew steadier, like she was reaching back through time to touch something solid. He was loud, she said. God, he was so loud. From the day he was born, he had opinions about everything. He didn't like being swaddled, hated it, would scream until we let his arms free. And when he started talking, he never stopped. He'd narrate everything he did. Now I'm putting on my shoes, now I'm going to the kitchen, now I'm eating a banana. Like his life was a documentary, and he was the host. Caleb smiled despite himself. Sounds like Mia. He loved superheroes. Spider-Man especially. He had this Spider-Man costume he wore for 6 months straight. Wore it to the grocery store, wore it to the park, wore it to bed. I had to wash it every other night because it got so gross, and he'd stand outside the laundry room in his underwear waiting for it to be done so he could put it back on. That's a good kid. He was. Tessa's voice caught. He is. He's still in there somewhere. I know he is, but it's getting harder to see him through all the pain. They talked for another 20 minutes. Caleb told her about the time Mia had decided she wanted to be a paleontologist and had started digging holes in their apartment complex's lawn looking for fossils, much to the landlord's fury. Tessa told him about Eli's obsession with making up his own superhero names: Captain Broccoli, Super Toast, the Incredible Blanket Fort. By the time they hung up, Tessa's breathing had evened out and Eli had finally fallen asleep. Caleb went back to bed but didn't sleep. He lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, thinking about a woman he barely knew and a child who was dying, and wondering what the hell he was doing getting involved in this. But when his phone rang again 2 nights later, he answered on the first ring. It became a pattern. Tessa would call in the middle of the night, sometimes because Eli was in pain, sometimes because she couldn't sleep, sometimes because the silence in her apartment felt like it was swallowing her whole. And Caleb would answer, every single time. They never talked about anything heavy. No discussions about mortality or meaning or what came after. Just small things. Stupid things. The kind of mundane conversation that reminded you the world was still turning even when your personal corner of it was collapsing. A week after the first call, Caleb asked the question he'd been holding back. "Can I meet him?" Tessa went silent. He could hear her breathing, the way it hitched and caught like she was trying to decide whether to tell him the truth or a comfortable lie. "Why?" she asked finally. "Because he's important to you. And because I want to." "Caleb, you don't have to do that. I didn't call you because I wanted something from you. I know what you needed. And I'm not offering because I feel obligated. I'm offering because I want to meet the kid who wore a Spider-Man costume for 6 months straight." Another long silence. Then, so quietly, he almost missed it. "Okay." 2 days later, Caleb stood outside Tessa's apartment building with a paper bag in his hands and his heart hammering in his chest like he was about to walk into a job interview. He'd left Mia with his neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who'd asked so many questions he'd finally just told her he was visiting a friend. Which wasn't exactly a lie, even if it didn't feel like the whole truth either. The building was in a decent neighborhood, not wealthy, but maintained. The kind of place where people worked hard to make rent and kept their heads down. Caleb found Tessa's apartment on the second floor and knocked. She opened the door looking exhausted. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt that had seen better days. No makeup. Dark circles under her eyes that looked like bruises. But when she saw him, she smiled, and it was real. "Hi." "Hi." Caleb held up the paper bag. "I brought cookies. I don't know if he can eat them, but I figured, that's really sweet." Tessa took the bag and stepped back to let him in. "Come in. He's awake. Having a good day, actually, or as good as they get." The apartment was small, a one-bedroom that Tessa had clearly turned into something else. The living room had been converted into a medical space. A hospital bed dominated the center of the room, surrounded by equipment Caleb didn't recognize. Oxygen tanks, monitors, an IV stand. The walls were still decorated like a normal home. Framed photos, a shelf of books, a kid's drawings taped to the refrigerator, but it all felt like set dressing for a play that had already ended. And in the bed, propped up on pillows, was Eli. He was small. That was Caleb's first thought. 5 years old, but he looked younger, his body thin and fragile under a Spider-Man blanket. His head was bald from treatment, his skin pale, his eyes too large in his face. But when he saw Caleb, those eyes focused with startling clarity. "Who's that?" Eli's voice was soft, slightly slurred, but curious rather than afraid. Tessa moved to his bedside, her hand automatically reaching to adjust his blanket. "This is my friend Caleb. He wanted to meet you. Is that okay?" Eli studied Caleb for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay." Caleb approached slowly, the way you would with a skittish animal, and crouched down beside the bed so he was at Eli's eye level. "Hey, buddy, your mom's told me a lot about you." "Like what?" "Like how you're a huge Spider-Man fan." Eli's face brightened just a fraction. "Spider-Man's the best. He's the strongest Avenger." "Strongest? What about Hulk?" "Hulk just smashes. Spider-Man is smart and strong. That's better." Caleb grinned. "You know what? You're right. I never thought about it that way." "Most people don't." Eli shifted slightly, wincing, and Tessa immediately leaned in to help him adjust. When he was settled again, he looked back at Caleb. "Do you like superheroes?" "I do." My daughter's favorite is Black Widow. Black Widow's cool. She doesn't have powers, but she's still awesome. Exactly. They talked about superheroes for the next 10 minutes. Caleb didn't know much about the Marvel universe beyond what Mia had forced him to watch. But Eli didn't seem to mind. He just seemed happy to have someone new to talk to, someone who wasn't a nurse or his mother or another well-meaning adult who looked at him like he was already a ghost. At one point, Eli asked, "Are you my mom's boyfriend?" Tessa's face flushed. Eli. "No," Caleb said simply. "I'm her friend." Oh, Eli thought about this. She doesn't have a lot of friends. Eli, Tessa said again, mortified. It's true. You said so. Caleb glanced at Tessa, who looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. He turned back to Eli. Well, she has one now. Eli smiled, a small, tired smile, but genuine. Good. Caleb stayed for an hour. He didn't do much, just sat in a chair Tessa pulled over, talking when Eli had the energy and sitting quietly when he didn't. At one point, Eli fell asleep mid-sentence, his head lolling to the side, and Tessa immediately moved to check his monitors, her hands quick and practiced. He does that, she said softly. Just drops off. The meds make him drowsy. He's a good kid. He is. Tessa sank into the chair across from Caleb, her shoulders sagging. Thank you for coming, and for not treating him like he's fragile. People do that. They talk to him like he's made of glass. He's tougher than glass. Tessa's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. Do you want some coffee? I made a pot earlier. It's probably terrible by now, but I'd love some. They moved to the tiny kitchen, leaving the door cracked so Tessa could hear if Eli woke up. She poured 2 mugs of coffee that was indeed terrible, burnt and bitter, but Caleb drank it anyway. Can I ask you something? Tessa leaned against the counter, her hands wrapped around her mug. Why are you doing this? And don't say it's because someone did it for you. I want the real reason. Caleb considered lying. It would have been easier, but Tessa had been nothing but honest with him, and she deserved the same. Because I know what it's like to be so alone you can't breathe, he said. And because when Mia was born and my wife died, I was so angry at the world I could barely function. Angry at her for dying, angry at Mia for surviving, angry at myself for being angry, and that anger almost destroyed me. The only thing that saved me was realizing I didn't have to do it alone, that there were people who would sit with me in the worst of it if I just let them. Tessa's expression softened. And you think I need that? I think everyone needs that. But yeah, I think you especially need it right now. What if I don't want to let anyone in? What if it's easier to do this alone? It's not easier, it just feels safer. Because if you don't let anyone in, they can't leave. They can't disappoint you. They can't see you at your worst and decide you're too much. Caleb set his mug down. But here's the thing, you're already at your worst, and I'm still here. So maybe you don't have to protect yourself from me. Tessa stared at him, her eyes searching his face like she was trying to find the lie, the angle, the hidden cost. But there wasn't one. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. Neither do I. So we'll figure it out as we go. After that night, Caleb started coming over regularly. Not every day. He still had work, still had Mia, but a few times a week. Sometimes he'd bring dinner. Sometimes he'd just sit with Eli while Tessa took a shower or lay down for 20 minutes. Sometimes he didn't do anything at all except exist in the same space, a reminder that she wasn't alone. 3 weeks after their first meeting, Caleb brought Mia with him. He'd asked Tessa first, of course. Asked if it was okay, if Eli was up for it, if she thought it was a good idea. Tessa had hesitated, and he'd seen the fear in her eyes. The fear that everyone eventually left, that letting Mia meet Eli would just be another person for Eli to lose. But she'd said yes. Mia had been nervous in the truck on the way over, picking at the hem of her shirt and asking a dozen questions Caleb didn't have good answers to. Is he really sick? Yes. Like hospital sick? Worse than that. Is he going to die? Caleb had gripped the steering wheel tighter. Probably. Mia had gone quiet after that. When they'd pulled into the parking lot, she'd looked up at him with wide, serious eyes. Are you scared? A little. Me too. But when they walked into Tessa's apartment and Mia saw Eli, this tiny kid in a hospital bed with a Spider-Man blanket and a shy smile, something shifted. She didn't flinch, didn't stare. She just walked right up to the bed like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Hi, I'm Mia." "I'm Eli. My dad says you like Spider-Man." "Yeah, me too, but I like Black Widow better." Eli grinned. "Your dad told me. Black Widow's cool." And just like that, they were talking. Not about being sick or scared or any of the heavy things weighing on the adults in the room. Just about superheroes and favorite foods and whether dinosaurs could beat robots in a fight. At one point, Mia climbed onto the bed, carefully, gently, but without hesitation, and sat cross-legged next to Eli, showing him a drawing she'd brought of a T-Rex fighting Iron Man. Eli laughed, the sound thin and tired but real, and Tessa's hand found Caleb's, her fingers squeezing so hard it hurt. They stayed for 2 hours. When it was time to leave, Mia hugged Eli goodbye and Eli hugged her back, his small arms barely able to reach around her. "Can I come back?" Mia asked. "Yeah," Eli said. "Please." In the truck on the way home, Mia was quiet again. Caleb glanced over at her, watching the streetlights play across her face. "You okay?" "Yeah." She paused. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "I think Eli's really brave." "Me too." "Are we going to be his friends, even when he gets sicker?" Caleb's throat tightened. "Yeah, kiddo, we are." "Good." Over the next month, the four of them became something that wasn't quite a family, but wasn't not a family either. Caleb and Mia would come over 3 or 4 times a week. Sometimes they'd watch movies together. Eli propped up in bed with Mia beside him, and Caleb and Tessa on the couch. Sometimes they'd just sit and talk, the conversation easy and comfortable in the way it only gets when people stop pretending everything's fine. Eli had good days and bad days. On the good days, he'd be alert and talkative, cracking jokes and arguing with Mia about which superhero would win in a fight. On the bad days, he'd sleep most of the time, his breathing labored, his face twisted in pain even through the medication. On one of the bad days, Tessa got a call from the insurance company. Caleb was in the kitchen making coffee when he heard her voice rise, sharp and desperate. "What do you mean it's not covered? The doctor prescribed it. He needs it." Caleb moved to the doorway, watching as Tessa paced the small space between the kitchen and the living room, her phone pressed to her ear. "I don't care about your protocols. My son is in pain. He's dying. And you're telling me you won't cover the one medication that actually helps?" Her voice cracked on the last word. Caleb could see Eli stirring in the bed, his face scrunching up the way it did when he was trying not to cry. No, I'm not accepting that. Let me talk to your supervisor. I don't care. Put them on the phone right now." The call went on for another 10 minutes, Tessa's voice growing hoarse as she argued and pleaded and finally begged. When she hung up, she stood frozen for a moment, the phone still in her hand, her whole body shaking. Then she screamed. It was a raw, animal sound torn from somewhere deep inside her. She threw the phone across the room and it shattered against the wall. Eli flinched, a small whimper escaping him, and Tessa immediately spun around, her face crumpling. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. Mommy didn't mean to scare you." She moved to the bed, but her legs gave out halfway there. She sank to the floor, her hands covering her face, sobs tearing through her like they were breaking her ribs on the way out. Caleb crossed the room in 3 strides. He knelt beside her, his hands on her shoulders. "Tessa, look at me." She couldn't. She was too far gone, drowning in it. "They won't cover it," she gasped. "The medication, the one that actually works. They said it's too expensive. They said there are alternatives, but the alternatives don't work, Caleb. They don't work, and he's in so much pain, and I can't fix it. I can't fix any of this." Caleb pulled her against his chest, holding her while she shattered. Over her shoulder, he could see Eli watching them, his eyes wide and scared, and Caleb made himself smile at the kid even though everything inside him was screaming. "It's okay, buddy," he called softly. "Your mom's okay." "I've got her." Eli nodded, but he didn't look convinced. When Tessa finally cried herself out, Caleb helped her to the couch and sat her down. He grabbed her a glass of water, made her drink it, and then crouched in front of her so they were eye to eye. How much does the medication cost? $3,000 for 1 month's supply. Caleb felt the number land in his stomach like a stone. $3,000? He didn't have $3,000. He barely had 300, but he didn't tell her that. We'll figure it out, he said. Caleb, you can't. We'll figure it out, he said again, firmer this time. You're not doing this alone. Not anymore. Over the next week, Caleb worked every angle he could think of. He picked up extra shifts at the shop, working 14-hour days until his hands bled and his vision blurred. He asked his boss about an advance and got turned down. He looked into loans and got rejected for not having good enough credit. Then he did something he'd sworn he'd never do. He asked his coworkers for help. Standing in the break room at the auto shop, grease still under his fingernails and exhaustion written across his face, Caleb told them about Eli, about the insurance denial, about the medication, about a 5-year-old kid who was running out of time. He didn't ask for money. He just told them the truth and left it hanging in the air. Marcus, the senior mechanic, was the first to speak. How much do you need? 3,000. Marcus whistled low. That's steep. I know. How much you got? 400, maybe 5 if I skip rent this month. The room went quiet. Then Marcus pulled out his wallet and laid $200 on the table. I've got kids, he said simply. I can't imagine. One by one, the others stepped forward. $20 here, $50 there, whatever they could spare. By the end of the shift, Caleb had $1,600 in cash and a promise from the shop owner to match it if Caleb could raise the rest. He did. He sold his guitar, the one thing he'd kept from before Mia, the one piece of himself that wasn't tied to being a father. He borrowed money from Mrs. Chen, promising to pay her back with interest. He even swallowed his pride and called his brother, who he hadn't spoken to in 3 years, and asked for $200. 10 days after Tessa's phone call, Caleb walked into her apartment and handed her an envelope with $3,000 in cash. Tessa stared at it like it was a bomb. Where did you get this? Don't worry about it. Caleb, don't worry about it, he said again. Just get Eli what he needs. Tessa's hand shook as she opened the envelope and counted the bills. When she looked up, tears were streaming down her face. I can't take this. Yes, you can. I'll never be able to pay you back. I'm not asking you to. Why are you doing this? Caleb reached out and took her hands, the envelope crumpling between them. Because he's a good kid, and because you're a good mother, and because if our positions were reversed, I hope someone would do it for me. Tessa pulled him into a hug so fierce it knocked the breath out of him. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The medication helped, not a lot, but enough. Eli's pain levels dropped from unbearable to manageable, and for a few weeks it almost felt like they'd bought themselves some time. But time wasn't something you could buy. Not really. Eli started declining faster in mid-March. The good days became rarer. The bad days became worse. He stopped being able to sit up on his own, stopped being able to eat solid food. His breathing grew labored even with the oxygen, and the hospice nurse started coming daily instead of weekly. One night, Caleb got a call at midnight. When he answered, Tessa didn't say hello. It's time, she said. The nurse thinks it's time, and I can't do this alone. And Caleb woke Mia up, bundled her into the truck, and drove to Tessa's apartment going 20 over the limit. They arrived to find the hospice nurse sitting vigil beside Eli's bed, her expression professionally compassionate but practiced in the way of someone who'd seen this too many times. Eli was barely conscious, his breathing shallow and rattling. Tessa sat beside him, holding his hand, whispering things Caleb couldn't hear. Mia stood in the doorway, suddenly small and uncertain. Caleb knelt beside her. You don't have to come in if you don't want to. Is he dying? Yes. Mia was quiet for a long moment. Then she walked across the room and climbed onto the bed beside Eli, just like she'd done a dozen times before. She took his other hand. It's okay, Eli, she said softly. You don't have to be scared. We're all here. Eli's eyes flickered open, just for a second, and he looked at Mia. His lips moved, forming words that didn't make sound, but Mia seemed to understand. She leaned down and hugged him, gentle and careful, and whispered something in his ear that made the corner of his mouth lift. Caleb moved to Tessa's side. She was shaking, her whole body rigid with the effort of holding herself together. He put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her against him. "I've got you," he said quietly. Eli died at 4:30 in the morning, just as the sky outside was starting to lighten from black to gray. He took one last breath, let it out slowly, and then he was gone. The hospice nurse checked his vitals, made the official pronouncement, and began the process of making calls. Mia cried silently, her face pressed against Caleb's chest. And Tessa didn't make a sound. She just sat there, still holding Eli's hand, staring at his face like if she looked away, he might disappear completely. Caleb stayed with her through all of it, through the nurse's quiet efficiency, through the removal of the medical equipment, through the arrival of the people from the funeral home. He stayed while Mia fell asleep on the couch, exhausted from crying. He stayed while the sun came up and filled the apartment with thin morning light that felt cruel in its normalcy. And when it was finally over, when Eli was gone and the apartment was empty except for the furniture and the memories, Tessa finally broke. She collapsed into Caleb's arms and wept like the world was ending, because for her, it was. Caleb held her until the crying stopped, until her body went limp with exhaustion, until the only sound left in the apartment was the hum of the refrigerator and the distant rumble of traffic outside. When Tessa finally pulled back, her face was swollen and blotchy, her eyes so red they looked painful. "I need to plan a funeral," she said, her voice hoarse and mechanical. "I need to call people. There are things I'm supposed to do. The nurse gave me a list." "Not right now. I have to." "Not right now," Caleb said again, firmer. "Right now, you need to sleep." "I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see him and Her breath hitched. "I can't." "Then don't sleep. Just lie down. Close your eyes. Breathe. That's all you have to do." He guided her to the bedroom, a space she'd barely used in months, preferring to sleep on the couch so she could hear Eli if he needed her. The bed was made with military precision, the kind of neatness that came from not being used rather than being cared for. Caleb pulled back the covers and made Tessa sit down. "I can't be in here," she whispered. "It's too quiet." "I'll stay with you. You don't have to." "I know." Tessa lay down, still fully clothed, and Caleb sat beside her on top of the covers. He didn't try to make her talk or feel better or process what had happened. He just sat there, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, while she stared at the ceiling and tried to remember how to exist in a world where Eli was gone. She didn't sleep, neither did Caleb. They just lay there in the gray morning light, two people who'd been strangers 6 weeks ago and were now bound together by grief and something else neither of them had words for. When Mia woke up on the couch an hour later, disoriented and afraid, Caleb went to her. He sat with her, explained as gently as he could that Eli had passed, and held her while she cried again. Then he made her breakfast she didn't eat and turned on the TV to a cartoon she didn't watch, and he felt utterly useless in the face of so much sadness. The funeral was 4 days later. Tessa moved through the preparations like a ghost, making decisions with the flat efficiency of someone who'd stopped feeling anything at all. She picked a casket, approved a program, wrote an obituary in 3 sentences because she couldn't bear to write more. She called the few relatives she had, an aunt in Montana, a cousin in Phoenix, and listened to their condolences with the phone held away from her ear like the words might burn. Caleb handled everything else. He contacted Tessa's landlord to explain why rent would be late. He fielded calls from the hospice agency and the insurance company and the dozen other entities that needed to be notified when a child died. He picked up Tessa's prescriptions because she'd stopped sleeping entirely, and the doctor had called in something to help. He made sure there was food in the apartment even though neither of them ate it. And he took Mia to school, picked her up, and tried to explain things she was too young to fully understand but old enough to feel deeply. "Is Tessa sad?" Mia asked one afternoon, sitting at their kitchen table with her homework untouched in front of her. "Very sad." "Are you sad?" "Yes." Mia traced her finger along the edge of her worksheet. "I miss Eli." "Me too." "Do you think he's in heaven?" Caleb considered lying. It would have been easier, but he'd never lied to Mia about the big things, and he wasn't going to start now. "I don't know, kiddo. I hope so." "Mom's in heaven, right?" The question caught him off guard. Mia almost never asked about her mother, not because she didn't care, but because she'd never known her. The absence was so complete it didn't leave room for longing. I think so, Caleb said carefully. Do you think she met Eli? Do you think they're friends? Something in Caleb's chest cracked. He pulled Mia into his lap and held her tight, pressing his face against the top of her head. Yeah, he said, his voice rough. I think they're friends. The funeral was small, maybe 20 people in a chapel that could hold 200, their voices swallowed by too much empty space. Eli's casket was child-sized, white with silver handles, and seeing it nearly broke Caleb all over again. There were flowers everywhere, donations from people who'd heard the story, who'd wanted to help but didn't know how. The smell was overwhelming, sweet and cloying, the kind of thing that would make Caleb hate lilies for the rest of his life. Tessa sat in the front row, flanked by her aunt and Caleb. She wore a black dress that hung loose on her frame, evidence of the weight she'd lost over the past months. Her face was blank, her eyes dry. She'd cried so much in the days leading up to this that she had nothing left. Mia sat on Caleb's other side, holding his hand so tight her knuckles were white. She'd insisted on coming, even though Caleb had offered to have Mrs. Chen watch her. She'd said she needed to say goodbye properly, and Caleb hadn't had the heart to argue. The service was brief. A pastor who'd never met Eli said generic things about innocence and heaven and God's plan. Tessa's aunt read a poem that made everyone cry except Tessa, who sat perfectly still like she was carved from stone. And then it was over, and they were filing out to the cemetery, and Caleb was helping Tessa into the car because her legs didn't seem to want to hold her anymore. At the graveside, Mia did something that surprised everyone. She walked up to the casket, pulled a folded piece of paper from her coat pocket, and tucked it beneath the flowers draped across the lid. What was that? Caleb asked when she came back. A drawing, Mia said simply, of Eli as Spider-Man. So he has it with him. Caleb's throat closed up. He pulled Mia against his side and pressed a kiss to the top of her head, unable to speak. When the casket was lowered into the ground, Tessa finally reacted. She made a sound, low and broken, barely human, and her knees buckled. Caleb caught her before she hit the ground, holding her upright while she sobbed against his shoulder. People moved away, giving them space, until it was just the three of them standing beside a hole in the earth that held everything Tessa had left. After the funeral, people came back to Tessa's apartment for food and fellowship, the way people do when someone dies. But the apartment felt wrong for it, too small, too full of medical equipment that hadn't been removed yet, too saturated with grief to hold anything else. Tessa stood in the kitchen accepting condolences with the same blank expression she'd worn all day, and Caleb stayed close, ready to intervene if anyone said something stupid. Someone did. Tessa's cousin, a woman Caleb had met exactly once, cornered Tessa by the coffee maker and said, with the kind of forced brightness people use when they're uncomfortable, "At least he's not suffering anymore. And you're still young. You can have another child." Tessa went white. Her hand, which had been reaching for a cup, froze midair. Caleb stepped between them before Tessa could respond. "I think Tessa needs some air. Excuse us." He guided Tessa out of the apartment and into the hallway, then down the stairs and out into the parking lot. She didn't speak. She just stood there, staring at nothing, her whole body shaking. "Breathe," Caleb said quietly. "I can't." "Yes, you can. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Come on." She tried. It came out ragged and broken, but it was something. "Another child," she said after a moment, her voice strangled. "Like Eli was replaceable. Like I could just get a new one and everything would be fine." She's an idiot. They all think it. They're all just waiting for me to move on so they can stop feeling uncomfortable. Then they can wait a long time. Tessa looked at him, her eyes raw and exhausted. "How long does it take to stop feeling like this?" Caleb thought about his wife, about the way her death had hollowed him out and left him functioning but not whole. 8 years later, and he still had days where the grief came back so sharp it stole his breath. "I don't think it stops," he said honestly. "I think you just learn to carry it." "I don't want to carry it. It's too heavy." "I know, but you're not carrying it alone." Tessa's face crumpled, and Caleb pulled her into his arms again, This person he barely knew, but somehow understood better than people he'd known his whole life. They stayed outside until the guests started leaving, until the apartment emptied out and went quiet. When they went back inside, Tessa looked around at the dirty plates and half-empty casserole dishes and the flowers that were already starting to wilt, and something in her expression shuddered. "I can't stay here," she said. "What do you mean?" "I can't stay in this apartment. I can't sleep in that bedroom knowing he's not in the other room. I can't walk past that empty space where his bed was. I can't—" Her voice broke. "I need to leave." "Okay," Caleb said. "Where do you want to go?" "I don't know. A hotel, maybe. Somewhere that doesn't smell like him." Caleb looked at her. This woman who was barely holding herself together, who had no one else to lean on, who would spend the next weeks and months drowning in silence if someone didn't throw her a rope. "Come stay with us," he heard himself say. Tessa blinked. "What?" "Come stay with me and Mia, just for a while, until you figure out what's next." "Caleb, I can't." "Yes, you can. We have a second bedroom. It's small, but it's clean, and you shouldn't be alone right now." "You barely know me." "I know you well enough." Tessa stared at him, and for the first time since Eli died, something other than grief flickered across her face, something that might have been hope, or might have been fear, or might have been both. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." She moved in 2 days later with nothing but a duffel bag of clothes and a box of Eli's things she couldn't leave behind. Caleb's apartment was smaller than hers, a 2-bedroom in a complex that had seen better days, but it was clean and quiet and didn't carry the weight of medical equipment and hospice visits. Mia was thrilled. She helped Tessa unpack, chattered about how they could share her art supplies, and insisted Tessa take the better pillow from the linen closet. She treated Tessa's presence like it was the most natural thing in the world, with the easy acceptance of a child who hadn't learned yet that grief was supposed to isolate you. That first night, Caleb made spaghetti, the only thing he knew how to make that wasn't sandwiches, and they ate together at the small kitchen table. Mia talked enough for all 3 of them, narrating her day at school in a complicated story about a substitute teacher who'd let them have extra recess. Tessa picked at her food but didn't eat, and Caleb didn't push. After dinner, Mia asked if they could watch a movie. Caleb started to say no, thinking Tessa needed space, but Tessa surprised him. "What movie?" she asked. "The Incredibles," Mia said immediately. "I've never seen it." Mia's eyes went wide. "Never?" "Never." "You have to watch it. It's the best one." So they did. The 3 of them crowded onto Caleb's worn couch, Mia in the middle with a blanket pulled up to her chin, and watched a movie about a family of superheroes learning to work together. Halfway through, Mia fell asleep with her head on Tessa's shoulder, and Tessa didn't move, didn't wake her, just sat there with tears sliding silently down her face while animated characters saved the world. The days that followed settled into a routine that none of them had planned, but all of them needed. Caleb worked his shifts at the shop, coming home smelling like oil and exhaustion. Mia went to school and came back full of stories, and Tessa existed in the spaces between, moving through the apartment like a shadow, sometimes present and sometimes not. She didn't work. She'd quit her job the week Eli died, unable to face going back to an office where people would ask how she was doing and expect a real answer. She didn't go out much either, except to walk to the grocery store when she needed to feel like she was contributing something. Mostly she just sat, on the couch, at the kitchen table, on the small balcony that overlooked the parking lot, and tried to figure out how to be a person in a world that no longer contained her son. Caleb didn't push. He just made sure there was coffee in the mornings, food in the evenings, and space for her to fall apart when she needed to. He was good at that, at being steady when everything else was chaos. It was a skill he'd learned the hard way, in the months after Mia was born, when every day felt like drowning. Sometimes, late at night after Mia was asleep, Tessa would knock on Caleb's bedroom door. He'd open it to find her standing in the hallway in pajamas, her face tight with the effort of holding back tears. "Can we talk?" she'd ask. And they would. They'd sit in the living room with the lights off and the city quiet outside, and Tessa would talk about Eli. About the guilt that ate at her, guilt for not catching the cancer sooner, for not fighting the insurance company harder, for every moment she'd been impatient or tired or less than perfect. She talked about the anger, too, at a medical system that had failed her son, at a universe that would let a 5-year-old suffer, at herself for surviving when he didn't. Caleb listened. He didn't try to absolve her or fix her or tell her it would get better. He just listened, the way someone had once listened to him, and let her say all the things she couldn't say in daylight. "Do you think I'm a bad mother?" she asked one night, her voice small in the darkness. "No. I couldn't save him. That wasn't your job. Your job was to love him, and you did that. It wasn't enough. It was everything." Tessa was quiet for a long time. Then, so softly, he almost missed it. "I don't know how to live without him. One day at a time. 1 hour if you have to. 1 minute. And if I can't even do that, then you let me help you through the next minute, and the one after that." 2 months passed. Spring turned to early summer. The world outside kept moving with the careless momentum of a thing that didn't know a child had died, and Tessa slowly started to rejoin it in small, painful increments. She started sleeping through the night without nightmares. She started eating meals instead of picking at them. She started helping Mia with homework, reading books again, taking showers without Caleb having to remind her. Progress, Caleb thought, even though he knew grief didn't move in straight lines. But there were setbacks, too. Days where Tessa couldn't get out of bed, where the weight of everything pressed her flat and she could barely breathe. Days where she'd see something, a Spider-Man toy, a mother with a young son, a hospital on TV, and it would crack her open all over again. On one of those days, Caleb came home from work to find Tessa sitting on the balcony with a bottle of wine she'd drunk half of, staring at nothing. "Tessa." She didn't look at him. "I went to the cemetery today." Caleb sat down beside her. "How was it?" "There's grass growing on the grave now, like he's been gone long enough for things to take root." Her voice was flat, distant. "I brought flowers." "Stupid, right? He can't see them. He doesn't know I was there. But I brought them anyway because what else am I supposed to do?" "It's not stupid." "I talked to him, told him about my day, about Mia's latest dinosaur obsession, about how you fixed Mrs. Chen's car for free because her alternator died. And the whole time I was talking, I kept thinking, he's not here. He's not anywhere. He's just gone." Caleb didn't have an answer for that. There wasn't one. "Sometimes I wish I'd died with him," Tessa said quietly. "Not because I want to be dead, but because I want to be wherever he is. And I know that's selfish. I know Mia needs me, and you've done so much, and I should be grateful, but I can't. I can't stop wishing it. That's not selfish. That's love." Tessa finally looked at him, her eyes red and hollow. "How did you do it? After your wife died, how did you wake up every day and choose to keep going?" "Because Mia needed me. And because I knew if I gave up, I'd be letting both of them down. My wife for not taking care of our daughter, and Mia for not being the father she deserved." "But what if I don't have anyone who needs me?" "You have me," Caleb said. "And Mia. We need you." "Why? You were fine before I showed up." "We weren't fine. We were functional. There's a difference." He reached over and took the wine bottle from her hand, setting it aside. "You think we're doing you a favor by letting you stay here. But the truth is you've done more for us than we've done for you." "How?" "Because Mia's learning that family isn't just about blood. She's learning that showing up for people when they're broken is more important than showing up when they're whole. And I'm learning that I don't have to do everything alone. That letting people in doesn't make me weak." Tessa's eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve this." "Yes, you do." She shook her head, pulling her knees to her chest. "You don't understand. I'm not getting better. I'm not healing. I'm just pretending so you don't worry, but inside I'm still the same mess I was the day he died." "I know." "Then why do you let me stay?" "Because healing isn't linear, and because you don't have to be better to be worth caring about." Tessa broke then, the way she'd been breaking in increments for months, and Caleb held her while she cried. The sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that felt obscene in their beauty, and somewhere in the apartment Mia was humming to herself while she colored, safe and loved, and unaware of how fragile everything really was. By July, something had shifted. Tessa was still grieving, would always be grieving, but she'd found a way to exist alongside it instead of being consumed by it. She started looking at job postings, talking about going back to work, making plans that extended beyond the next hour. Caleb should have been happy about it, and he was, mostly. But there was a part of him, a part he didn't want to examine too closely, that wondered what would happen when Tessa didn't need them anymore. If she'd leave. If this strange patchwork family they'd built would dissolve as quickly as it had formed. He didn't say any of this. He just kept showing up, kept being steady, kept pretending he wasn't terrified of losing another person he cared about. The 4th of July arrived hot and humid, the kind of weather that made everything feel sticky and slow. Mia wanted to go see fireworks, and after some debate, they decided to make a day of it, pack a picnic, head to the park, pretend to be a normal family doing normal family things. They spread a blanket on the grass and ate sandwiches while Mia ran around with other kids, shrieking and laughing and completely unself-conscious. Tessa watched her with something almost like peace on her face. "She's good for me," Tessa said. "Reminds me that joy still exists." "She's good for everyone," Caleb said. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun sink lower in the sky. Around them, families gathered in clusters, setting up chairs and coolers, claiming their spots for the evening's show. It was aggressively normal, almost painfully so, and Caleb could see Tessa struggling with it, the reminder that the world kept spinning, even when yours had stopped. When the fireworks started, Mia came running back and wedged herself between them, her head tilted back to watch the sky explode in colors. Tessa reached over and took Caleb's hand, her fingers cold despite the heat, and he squeezed back. They stayed until the grand finale, until the sky was full of smoke and the crowd started dispersing. Mia fell asleep in the truck on the way home, her face pressed against the window, and Caleb carried her inside and tucked her into bed, still wearing her clothes because she was too deeply asleep to wake. When he came back to the living room, Tessa was standing by the door with her purse in her hand. "I need to go," she said. Caleb's stomach dropped. "Go where?" "I don't know." "Away. Somewhere." She wouldn't look at him. "I can't do this anymore." "Do what?" "This. Pretending, playing house, acting like I'm part of your family when I'm not." "Tessa, you've been so kind to me, Caleb, you and Mia both. But I don't belong here. I'm a guest who's overstayed her welcome, and I need to leave before you realize that too." Caleb crossed the room in 2 strides. "That's not true." "It is. You're doing this out of pity. It's not pity. And I can't keep taking from you when I have nothing to give back. You deserve better than that. You deserve someone whole, someone who can actually contribute instead of just taking up space and crying all the time. You're not taking up space. You're living here. There's a difference." "I need to go," Tessa said again, her voice breaking. "Please don't make this harder than it already is." She turned and walked out before Caleb could stop her. The door clicked shut, and he stood frozen in the middle of the living room, his mind racing and his heart hammering like it was trying to break through his ribs. He should go after her. He should stop her, make her listen, tell her all the things he'd been too afraid to say. But his feet wouldn't move, and by the time he finally made it to the door and yanked it open, Tessa's car was already pulling out of the parking lot, taillights disappearing into the summer night. Caleb stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where her car had been, and tried to figure out how everything had fallen apart so quickly. Behind him, Mia's voice called out, small and sleepy, "Dad, where's Tessa?" He didn't have an answer. Caleb turned to find Mia standing in the hallway in her pajamas, her hair sticking up on one side, her eyes still heavy with sleep but sharpening with worry. "She had to go somewhere," Caleb said, the lie tasting bitter on his tongue. "When's she coming back?" "I don't know, kiddo." Mia's face crumpled. "Did she leave because of me?" "No." Caleb crossed to her and knelt down, taking her by the shoulders. "No, baby, this has nothing to do with you. Tessa she's going through a really hard time, and sometimes when people are hurting, they need space. But we gave her space. We gave her a whole room. That's not the kind of space I mean." "Then what kind?" Caleb didn't have a good answer. He pulled Mia into a hug instead, holding her while she sniffled against his shoulder. When he finally got her back to bed, She asked 3 more times if Tessa was coming back, and each time Caleb said he didn't know, the words felt heavier. He didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over, trying to figure out where it had gone wrong. Tessa had seemed fine earlier, quiet maybe, but not on the verge of running. Had he missed something, said something, failed to say something that mattered? Or maybe she was right. Maybe he had been doing this out of pity, and she'd finally seen through it. Except that wasn't true. Caleb knew what pity felt like, and this wasn't it. This was something messier and more complicated, something that had crept up on him so gradually he hadn't noticed until it was already wrapped around his ribs. He cared about Tessa, not in the abstract way you cared about someone going through a hard time, but in the specific, terrifying way that meant her leaving had carved a hole in his chest he didn't know how to fill. But she was gone, and maybe that was for the best. Maybe it was better to lose her now, before Mia got more attached, before he let himself believe this could be permanent. The thought didn't make him feel better. It just made him feel tired. The next morning, Mia was subdued. She picked at her breakfast and asked twice if they could call Tessa. And when Caleb said no, because he didn't know what he'd say if she actually answered, Mia retreated to her room with her dinosaur toys and didn't come out for hours. Caleb went to work because he didn't know what else to do. He threw himself into an engine rebuild with more force than necessary, skinning his knuckles and cursing under his breath while Marcus watched with raised eyebrows. "You good?" Marcus asked during lunch break. "Fine." "You don't look fine. You look like you want to punch something." Caleb flexed his bruised hand. "I already did. The engine won't notice." Marcus took a long drink from his water bottle, considering. "This about that woman? The one with the sick kid?" "Her kid died 2 months ago." "Damn, I'm sorry." "Yeah." "She doing okay?" Caleb let out a harsh laugh. "She left last night, packed up and walked out without explanation." "She say why?" "Said she didn't belong. Said I was just doing it out of pity." Caleb threw his wrench into his toolbox harder than necessary. "Maybe she's right." "Is she?" The question hung in the air. Caleb wanted to say yes, wanted to take the easy answer and move on, but he couldn't make himself do it. "No," he said finally. "I don't think so." "Then why'd you let her leave?" "Because she wanted to go." "What was I supposed to do? Lock her in?" Marcus shrugged. "You could have told her how you feel." "I don't—" Caleb stopped. "It's not like that." "Isn't it?" Caleb didn't answer. He went back to work, burying himself in parts and problems that had solutions, and tried not to think about the way Tessa's hand had felt in his during the fireworks, cold and small and trusting. The days bled together. Caleb worked. Mia went to school and came home quieter than usual. The apartment felt too big without Tessa in it, every empty space a reminder of what was missing. Her bedroom door stayed closed, and neither of them went inside. A week passed. Then 2. Caleb told himself it was better this way, that they'd go back to normal, that the ache in his chest would fade with time. But Mia kept asking when Tessa was coming back, and every time Caleb said he didn't know, it hurt a little more. On a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after Tessa left, Caleb got a call from an unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Probably a spam call, probably someone trying to sell him something he couldn't afford. But something made him pick up. "Hello? Is this Caleb Morgan?" A woman's voice, professional and slightly hurried. "Yeah, who's this?" "My name is Patricia Winters. I'm a hospice social worker at Denver General. I'm calling because we received a package addressed to Tessa Lane in care of our office, and the return address listed you as a contact. Do you know how we can reach Ms. Lane?" Caleb's grip tightened on the phone. "What kind of package?" "I'm not at liberty to say, but it appears to be personal in nature, and the sender indicated it was important that Ms. Lane receive it as soon as possible." "Who's it from?" A pause. "The sender is listed as Eli Lane." The air went out of Caleb's lungs. "That's not possible. Eli's dead." "I understand this must be confusing. All I can tell you is that the package was prepared before the child's passing and held with instructions to be delivered on a specific date. That date is today." Caleb's mind raced. "I don't know where Tessa is. She left." "I haven't talked to her in 3 weeks." "I see." Patricia sounded genuinely sympathetic. Do you have any way of contacting her? This seems like something she would want to receive. I have her number. I can try. Please do, and if you reach her, let her know she can pick up the package at our office anytime during business hours. Caleb hung up and stared at his phone like it might have answers. A package from Eli. Prepared before he died. To be delivered today. Today. July 23rd. Caleb pulled up his calendar and felt his stomach drop. July 23rd would have been Eli's 6th birthday. His hand shook as he pulled up Tessa's contact. He'd opened the text thread a dozen times over the past 3 weeks, typed messages he never sent, deleted them, and started over. The last message was from her, sent the night she left. I'm sorry. He'd never responded. Now he typed, a hospice social worker just called. There's a package for you, from Eli. You need to pick it up. What? He hit send before he could second-guess himself and then sat there staring at the screen, waiting for the 3 dots that meant she was typing back. They didn't come. 5 minutes passed. 10. Caleb was about to call her directly when his phone buzzed. What do you mean from Eli? Caleb typed back quickly. I don't know. They said it was prepared before he died. Held until today. His birthday. The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again, then, where? Denver General Hospice Office, business hours. Another long pause, then, thank you. That was it. No explanation for where she'd been, no apology for leaving, no acknowledgement of the past 3 weeks. Just 2 words and then silence. Caleb wanted to throw his phone across the room. Instead, he called Marcus over and told him he needed to leave early. Family emergency? Marcus asked. Something like that. He picked up Mia from school and drove straight to the hospice office, his heart pounding the entire way. He didn't know if Tessa would be there, didn't know what he'd say if she was. But the thought of her going through this alone, opening whatever Eli had left for her without anyone there to catch her when she fell, was unbearable. The hospice office was in the hospital's east wing, tucked away in a quiet corner that felt deliberately separate from the chaos of the emergency room and surgical floors. Caleb held Mia's hand as they walked down the hallway, both of them silent. Patricia Winters was waiting at the front desk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and the practiced calm of someone who dealt with grief for a living. She recognized Caleb immediately. Mr. Morgan? Yeah, is she here? Not yet, but she called about 20 minutes ago to confirm she was coming. Patricia glanced at Mia, then back at Caleb. You're welcome to wait if you'd like. They sat in chairs that were probably meant to be comforting, but just felt sad. Mia swung her legs and asked questions Caleb didn't have answers to, and he watched the door like he could will Tessa to walk through it. She arrived 15 minutes later. Caleb saw her before she saw him. She looked thinner than she had 3 weeks ago, her face drawn and pale, her clothes hanging loose. But it was her eyes that stopped him. They looked hollowed out, like she'd spent the past week somewhere dark and hadn't quite made it back. Then she spotted him and stopped dead in the doorway. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Caleb stood slowly, suddenly unsure of what he was doing here, whether he had any right to be here at all. Caleb, Tessa said, her voice barely above a whisper. Hey! Mia bolted from her chair and ran to Tessa, wrapping her arms around Tessa's waist. You came back! Tessa's hands came up automatically to hold Mia, and Caleb saw her face twist with something between joy and pain. Hi, sweetheart. We missed you so much. Dad's been really sad, and I've been sad too, and we didn't know where you went. Mia, Caleb said gently, give Tessa some space. Mia stepped back reluctantly, and Tessa crouched down to her level. I'm sorry I left without saying goodbye. That wasn't fair to you. Are you coming back home? I don't... Tessa glanced at Caleb, her expression unreadable. I don't know. Patricia cleared her throat delicately. Miss Lane? Whenever you're ready. Tessa stood, smoothing her hands over her jeans like she was trying to compose herself. Right, okay. She started toward the desk, then turned back. Caleb, could you come with me? It wasn't a demand or an expectation, just a quiet request from someone who looked like she might break if she had to do this alone. Yeah, Caleb said. Of course. Patricia led them to a small private room, the kind hospitals use for difficult conversations, and retrieved a package from a locked cabinet. It was small, wrapped in brown paper, with Tessa's name written on it in handwriting that made Tessa's breath catch. "I'll give you some privacy," Patricia said, and left. Tessa stood frozen, staring at the package in her hands like it might explode. Mia had stayed in the waiting room with a coloring book Patricia had given her, which meant it was just the two of them in this small room with whatever message Eli had left behind. "I can't do this," Tessa whispered. "Yes, you can. What if I can't handle what he says?" "Then I'll be here." Tessa's hands shook as she tore open the paper. Inside was a small cardboard box, and inside that was a letter and a USB drive. The letter was typed, probably dictated to a nurse, Caleb guessed, when Eli had still been able to talk, but not to write. Tessa unfolded it with trembling fingers and began to read aloud, her voice barely holding together. "Dear Mom, the nurse is helping me write this because my hands don't work good anymore. I wanted to tell you something important, and I wanted you to hear it on my birthday because that's a good day, and I don't want you to be sad on my birthday." Tessa stopped, pressing her hand to her mouth. Caleb moved closer, close enough that their shoulders were touching, and she leaned into him without seeming to realize she was doing it. She continued, "I know you're really sad that I'm sick. I'm sad too, but I don't want you to be sad forever because that would make me sad even when I'm not here anymore. I want you to remember the good stuff, like when we watched movies, and when we went to the park, and when you made me pancakes shaped like Spider-Man, even though they always looked kind of weird." Tessa let out a wet laugh through her tears. "I know you met Caleb and Mia, and I think that's really good. Caleb is nice, and Mia is my friend, and I think they make you happy. When I first got really sick, I thought nobody would ever want to be around us because being sick is hard and sad. But then they showed up, and Mia didn't care that I was sick, and Caleb didn't care that you were sad, and I think that means they're special." Caleb felt something lodge in his throat. "So, here's the important thing I want to tell you. I want you to keep being friends with them. I want you to let them make you happy. I want you to do fun stuff and laugh and not feel bad about it, because I'm not mad that you're still alive, and I'm not. I'm really glad you're still alive, and I don't want you to stop living just because I had to stop." Tessa's voice broke completely. Caleb took the letter from her shaking hands and kept reading. "The nurse says I need to finish soon because I'm getting tired. So I'm going to say one more thing, and I need you to really listen. You're the best mom in the whole world. You took care of me every single day, even when you were tired and scared and sad. You never gave up on me, and you made me feel loved even when I was in pain. And I need you to know that it's okay to be happy again. I want you to be happy. Please be happy." The letter was signed with a wobbly E that Eli must have managed to write himself, and underneath it was a PS. "The USB has pictures and videos the nurse helped me make. For when you miss me." Tessa collapsed into a chair, the letter falling from Caleb's hands as he moved to catch her. She sobbed into her hands with the kind of raw, unrestrained grief that had no concern for dignity or composure, and Caleb held her while she shattered all over again. But this time, something was different. This time, the grief wasn't pulling her under. It was washing through her, painful but clean, like a wound finally being cleaned out. When she could breathe again, she looked up at Caleb with swollen eyes. He knew. He knew I was going to run away from you. He knew you were scared. I've been so stupid. Fresh tears spilled over. I left because I thought I was protecting you from my damage, but I was really just protecting myself from being happy again, because being happy felt like betraying him. I know. How can you know? How can you possibly understand? Because I did the same thing, Caleb said quietly. After Mia's mom died, I told myself I had to focus on being a father, that there wasn't room for anything else. But really, I was just terrified that if I let myself care about anyone else, I'd lose them too, and I couldn't survive that again. Tessa stared at him. But you let me in. Yeah. Why? Because you were worth the risk. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Caleb hadn't planned to voice, but couldn't take back. Tessa's expression shifted, something cracking open in her face. I don't deserve you, she whispered. Stop saying that. Stop deciding for me what I deserve or what I want. What do you want? Caleb took a breath, feeling like he was standing on the edge of something he couldn't come back from. I want you to come home. I want you to stop running from the people who care about you. I want you to believe that you can be happy again without erasing Eli's memory. He paused. And I want you to know that when I asked you to stay with us, it wasn't pity. It was never pity. Then what was it? It was me being selfish, because having you there made my life better, made Mia's life better, made everything feel less like survival and more like actually living. Tessa's breath caught. Caleb, you don't have to say anything right now. You don't owe me anything. But if you're making decisions about where you belong, I need you to know you belong with us, if you want to be. Tessa closed her eyes, tears still streaming down her face. I've been staying in a motel for 3 weeks, eating takeout and staring at walls and trying to convince myself I was doing the right thing. And every single day I thought about coming back. Every single day I picked up my phone to call you and then put it down because I was so sure you were better off without me. We weren't. Mia asked if I was coming home. She asks every day. Tessa opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him, like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. What if I'm still broken? What if I can't be what you need? I don't need you to be anything except yourself, broken parts included. What if the grief never goes away? Then we'll carry it together. That's what families do. The word landed between them with the weight of a promise. Family. Not friends, not charity, not temporary arrangement. Family. Tessa stood on shaky legs and closed the distance between them. She took Caleb's face in her hands and kissed him, not with passion or heat, but with desperate gratitude, with relief, with the kind of vulnerability that came from letting someone see you at your worst and choosing them anyway. When they pulled apart, they were both crying. I'm sorry, Tessa said. I'm so sorry I ran. I know. I want to come home. If you'll still have me. Always. They stood there for a long moment, foreheads pressed together, breathing in sync. Then Tessa picked up the USB drive, closed her hand around it, and nodded. They found Mia in the waiting room exactly where they'd left her, surrounded by scattered crayons and a drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands. When she saw Tessa, her face lit up. Are you coming home? Yeah, sweetheart, Tessa said, her voice thick but steady. I'm coming home. Mia launched herself at Tessa again, and this time Tessa caught her and held on tight, burying her face in Mia's hair. Caleb watched them and felt something settle in his chest, something that had been untethered for a long time finally finding its place. They left the hospital together, Tessa's hand in Caleb's, and Mia between them chattering about everything she wanted to show Tessa when they got back to the apartment. The summer sun was setting, painting everything in gold, and for the first time in months, the beauty of it didn't feel like an insult. That night, after Mia was asleep, Tessa asked if they could watch the videos Eli had made. They sat on the couch with Caleb's laptop, and Tessa plugged in the USB drive with shaking hands. There were 17 videos. Most were short, Eli talking to the camera, his voice thin but determined, telling his mom stories or jokes or just saying he loved her. Some were just a few seconds. Eli smiling, Eli waving, Eli blowing a kiss. Tessa cried through all of them, but she also laughed, real, genuine laughter, at Eli's goofy faces and terrible puns. And when the last video ended with Eli saying, "Don't forget to be happy, Mom. I mean it," Tessa closed the laptop and turned to Caleb. "I think I'm ready to try," she said. "Try what?" "Being happy again, not all at once, but little by little." "Okay. Will you help me?" Caleb pulled her close, tucking her against his side. Every single day. They sat like that until late into the night, not talking, just existing together in the quiet darkness of the apartment that had somehow become home for all of them. Outside, the city hummed with life, cars passing, neighbors talking, the distant sound of music from someone's open window. The world kept turning, indifferent to personal tragedy. But inside this small space, 3 people who'd been broken by loss were slowly, painfully, learning to piece themselves back together. And for the first time since Eli died, Tessa let herself believe that might be enough. The next morning, Tessa woke up in the small bedroom that had been hers for 2 months, then empty for 3 weeks, and was now hers again. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, and she could hear Mia's voice in the kitchen, high and animated, telling Caleb some elaborate story about a dream she'd had involving dinosaurs and ice cream trucks. For the first time in months, the sound didn't make Tessa want to cry. It just made her want to get up and be part of it. She found them at the kitchen table, Mia still in her pajamas with syrup on her chin, Caleb making coffee in sweatpants and an old t-shirt that had a hole in the collar. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression softened. "Morning." "Morning." Tessa poured herself coffee from the pot he'd already made, black and strong the way she liked it. "What are we talking about?" "Dinosaurs," Mia said immediately. "Did you know that a T-Rex could eat like 500 pounds of meat in one bite?" "I did not know that." "It's true. I read it in a book. And also in my dream last night there was a T-Rex driving an ice cream truck, but it couldn't reach the steering wheel because its arms were too short, so it kept crashing into things." Tessa sat down at the table, wrapping her hands around her mug. "That sounds like a problem." It was, but then a brachiosaurus helped because it had a long neck and could see over everything. "Teamwork," Caleb said, catching Tessa's eye over Mia's head. "Important stuff." They ate breakfast together, slightly burnt toast and scrambled eggs that were too runny, and it was imperfect and mundane and exactly what Tessa needed. After, Caleb left for work with a kiss pressed to Mia's forehead and a hand squeezed to Tessa's shoulder, and Tessa helped Mia get ready for a playdate at a friend's house. When the apartment was finally quiet, Tessa stood in the middle of the living room and made herself say it out loud. "I'm gonna be okay." The words felt fragile, like they might shatter if she examined them too closely. But they also felt true in a way nothing had felt true since Eli died. She spent the afternoon doing something she hadn't done in months. She looked for a job. Not in marketing, not in the corporate world she'd left behind. She couldn't go back to that, couldn't spend her days crafting messages designed to make people want things they didn't need. Instead, she searched for positions in hospice care, social work, grief counseling, places where her experience, the worst experience of her life, might actually mean something, might help someone else survive what felt unsurvivable. She found a posting for a family advocate at the same hospice agency that had cared for Eli. The job description made her cry, but in a different way than she'd been crying for months. This was recognition, not despair. She understood every word of what they were asking for because she'd lived it. She submitted her application before she could talk herself out of it. 2 days later, they called her for an interview. A week after that, they offered her the job. Tessa stood in Caleb's kitchen with the offer letter in her hands, staring at it like it might disappear. When Caleb got home from work, she showed it to him without saying anything. He read it twice, then looked at her with something fierce and proud in his expression. "You're going to take it." "I don't know if I can do it. What if I'm not strong enough?" "You're the strongest person I know." "What if I fall apart the first time I meet a family going through what I went through?" "Then you'll put yourself back together, like you've been doing every day for months." He set the letter down and took her hands. "And you won't be doing it alone. You'll have supervisors, colleagues, training, and you'll have us." Tessa looked down at their joined hands, at the way his fingers wrapped around hers like they belonged there. "I'm scared." "Good. That means it matters." She started the job 3 weeks later. The training was intense, 4 weeks of shadowing experienced advocates, learning protocols, sitting in on family meetings and care conferences. It was harder than she'd expected, being in those rooms again, hearing the medical jargon and watching families receive devastating news. But it was also healing in a way she hadn't anticipated. Because for the first time since Eli died, her grief had a purpose. Every family she met, every mother she sat with, every question she answered, it all meant something. She couldn't save Eli, but she could help other families navigate the same impossible journey she'd survived. On her first solo case, Tessa sat across from a father whose 12-year-old daughter had weeks to live. He was angry, railing against the unfairness of it all, demanding to know why this was happening to his child. Tessa let him rage. She didn't try to calm him or offer platitudes. She just sat there and held space for his fury until it burned itself out and left him hollow and exhausted. "How do I do this?" he asked finally, his voice broken. How do I watch my daughter die? Tessa thought about every easy lie she could tell him, about how he'd find strength he didn't know he had, about how love would carry him through, about how time would heal. Instead, she told him the truth. You do it 1 minute at a time. You show up every single day, even when you want to run. You let people help you when they offer because you can't do this alone. And you remember that being there for her, loving her through the worst of it, is the most important thing you'll ever do. The father stared at her, and she could see him searching her face for the lie, the false comfort. When he didn't find it, something in him cracked. You've done this, he said, not a question. Yes. Does it get easier? No, but you get stronger, and eventually you learn to carry it. She stayed with him for another hour, answering questions and just being present in a way only someone who'd survived it could be. When she left, she sat in her car in the parking lot and cried for 20 minutes. Then she drove home to Caleb and Mia, and she let them hold her while she told them about her day. You're doing important work, Caleb said quietly. It hurts. The important things usually do. Summer faded into fall. Mia started 3rd grade and declared she wanted to be a paleontologist when she grew up, which surprised exactly no one. Caleb got promoted to senior mechanic at the shop, which came with a small raise and slightly better hours. And Tessa settled into her job, building relationships with families and learning how to hold grief without letting it consume her. The three of them fell into rhythms that felt less like a temporary arrangement and more like a life. Breakfast together on weekends, movie nights on Fridays, homework at the kitchen table while Caleb cooked dinner and Tessa helped Mia with math problems that made both of them frustrated. They visited Eli's grave every few weeks. Sometimes all three of them, sometimes just Tessa. She'd bring flowers, never lilies, always something bright and cheerful, and tell him about her work, about Mia's latest dinosaur obsession, about how Caleb had fixed Mrs. Chen's car and refused payment again. On one visit in late October, with leaves falling around them and the air sharp with coming winter, Caleb knelt beside the headstone while Mia gathered acorns nearby. Hey, buddy, he said quietly. I wanted to thank you for the letter you left your mom, for telling her it was okay to be happy again. He paused, his throat tight. I'm going to take care of her, both of them, I promise. Tessa heard him from where she stood a few feet away. She didn't say anything, just moved to stand beside him and laced her fingers through his. That night, after Mia was asleep, Caleb asked Tessa to sit with him on the balcony. It was cold enough that they both wore jackets, their breath visible in the air. The city sprawled below them, lights twinkling like scattered stars. I need to tell you something, Caleb said. Tessa's heart stuttered. Okay. I've been thinking about this for a while, and I keep waiting for the right time, but I don't think there is a right time. So I'm just going to say it. He turned to face her fully. I'm in love with you. The words landed between them, simple and devastating. Tessa stared at him, her mind racing. She'd known, of course, had felt it in the way he looked at her, the way he always made sure there was coffee in the morning, the way he'd held her through panic attacks and grief spirals and nights when she couldn't breathe. But hearing it out loud was different. You don't have to say it back, Caleb continued quickly. I'm not trying to pressure you or make you feel like you owe me anything. I needed you to know, because I can't keep pretending this is just roommates or friends helping each other out. It's more than that, at least for me. Caleb, and I know the timing is terrible. I know you're still grieving and probably not ready for this, but I also know that if I don't tell you now, I might never have the courage to do it. And I'd rather risk losing you by being honest than lose you by staying silent. Tessa felt tears building, but for once they weren't tears of pain. You're not going to lose me. You don't know that. Yes, I do. She reached for his hand, holding it tight. Because I love you too. Caleb went very still. What? I love you. I've loved you for months, maybe since that first night in the diner when you sat down beside me and didn't flinch away from my grief. And I'm terrified because the last time I loved someone this much, I lost them, and I don't know if I could survive that again. But I also know that Eli was right. You and Mia make me happy. You make me want to keep living even when it's hard, and I don't want to waste the time I have being too scared to say it. Caleb pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight it almost hurt. Tessa buried her face in his neck and breathed him in, motor oil and laundry detergent and something that was just him. "I'm still broken," she whispered. "I'm still grieving. There are going to be bad days." "I know. And I don't know if I can give you everything you deserve." "You already do." They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped around each other against the cold, and when they finally kissed, it felt like coming home. The next morning, Mia noticed something different at breakfast. She looked between them with narrowed eyes, studying their faces like she was solving a puzzle. "Are you guys dating now?" she asked bluntly. Tessa nearly choked on her coffee. Caleb coughed. "What makes you ask that?" Caleb managed. "Because you keep looking at each other weird, and you're sitting really close." Mia took a bite of cereal. "Also, Mrs. Chen asked if you were dating, and I said I didn't know, but I'd find out." "Mrs. Chen needs to mind her business," Caleb muttered. "So are you?" Caleb looked at Tessa, raising an eyebrow. Tessa took a breath and nodded. "Yeah, kiddo," Caleb said. "We are." Mia considered this for a moment, then she shrugged. "Okay, can I have more orange juice?" That was it. No dramatics, no concerns, just casual acceptance and a request for juice. Caleb and Tessa exchanged glances, half amused and half amazed at how easy she'd made it. Later that day, though, Mia crawled into Tessa's lap while they were watching TV and asked quietly, "Does this mean you're going to stay forever?" Tessa's heart clenched. "I want to, if that's okay with you." "It's okay with me." Mia paused. "I miss Eli, but I'm glad you're here." "I miss him too, every day." "Do you think he knows that we're happy?" Tessa thought about the letter, about Eli's last words begging her not to stop living. "Yeah, sweetheart, I think he knows." Mia nodded, satisfied, and went back to watching her show. And Tessa sat there with this child who wasn't hers by blood, but felt like hers anyway, and let herself believe that maybe, impossibly, she was building something new from the wreckage of everything she'd lost. Winter arrived with the first snow in early December. Caleb had been planning something for weeks, checking the weather forecast obsessively and making mysterious phone calls when he thought Tessa wasn't listening. When he finally told her he wanted to take a day trip to the mountains, just the two of them, she agreed without asking questions. They left Mia with Mrs. Chen and drove west into the foothills, the landscape transforming from brown plains to snow-covered peaks. Caleb was nervous. Tessa could tell by the way he kept adjusting his grip on the steering wheel and clearing his throat like he was about to say something before falling silent. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" "You'll see." He drove them to a small cemetery on the outskirts of a mountain town, parking near a section that overlooked a valley. Tessa recognized it immediately. They'd buried Eli here because she'd wanted somewhere beautiful, somewhere that didn't feel like an ending. "Why are we here?" she asked, confused. Caleb got out of the truck without answering and came around to open her door. He led her through the snow to Eli's grave, which was marked now with a permanent headstone. Tessa had chosen the design months ago, simple granite with a small engraving of Spider-Man's mask in the corner. Standing there in the quiet cold, with snow falling gently around them, Caleb took Tessa's hand. "I've been thinking about how to do this," he said. "I wanted it to be perfect, wanted to plan some elaborate thing. But then I realized the most important moments aren't the perfect ones. They're the honest ones." Tessa's breath caught. "Eli brought us together," Caleb continued. "Not intentionally, not in any way he could have known. But that night in the diner, when you needed someone and I needed to help someone, that was him. He made you into the person you are, brave and loving and stronger than anyone I've ever met. And I think he'd want to be part of this." Caleb dropped to one knee in the snow. Tessa's hands flew to her mouth. "I don't have much to offer you," Caleb said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I'm a mechanic with a mortgage I can barely afford and a kid who leaves dinosaur toys everywhere. But I can offer you everything I am, my time, my loyalty, my love. I can offer you a family that will choose you every single day. And I can promise you that no matter how hard it gets, no matter how many bad days there are, I will show up. I will stay. I will love you through all of it." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it. Inside was a simple silver band with a small diamond, nothing extravagant, but clearly chosen with care. "Tessa Lane, will you marry me?" Tessa was crying too hard to speak. She nodded frantically, dropping to her knees in front of him, and threw her arms around his neck. "Yes," she managed. "Yes, yes, yes." Caleb slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, and they kissed there in the snow beside Eli's grave, two broken people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and somehow built something beautiful from the ruins. When they finally pulled apart, Tessa looked at the headstone through her tears. "He would have liked you," she said softly. "I wish I could have known him longer." "Me too." She touched the cold granite, tracing Eli's name with her fingers. "But I think he'd be happy about this. About us. I know he would." They stayed for a while, sitting in the snow and talking to Eli like he was there with them. Tessa told him about the proposal, about how she was going to marry Caleb and become Mia's stepmom, about how scared and happy she was all at once. Caleb promised to take care of her the way Eli would have wanted, to honor his memory by building a life full of love and joy. When they finally left, Tessa looked back one more time at the small grave with its superhero marking, and she felt something she hadn't felt since Eli died. Not just peace, but gratitude. Gratitude for the time she'd had with him, for the love he'd taught her, for the way his short life had intersected with Caleb's and created something neither of them could have found alone. They married the following May on what would have been Eli's 7th birthday. It was deliberate, intentional, a way of transforming a day of grief into a day of love. The wedding was small, held in the same mountain cemetery where Caleb had proposed. Just close friends, a few family members, and Mia, who served as flower girl and took her job very seriously. Tessa wore a simple white dress and carried flowers Mia had helped her pick. Caleb wore a suit that was slightly too big, borrowed from Marcus because he couldn't afford to buy one, but he looked at Tessa like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Before the ceremony started, Mia placed a framed photo of Eli on a chair in the front row. "So he can watch," she explained simply. Tessa knelt down and hugged her, this child who understood grief in ways no 8-year-old should have to, but faced it with remarkable grace. "Thank you, sweetheart." "You're welcome. He would want to be here." The ceremony was brief. A friend of Caleb's who'd gotten ordained online said the standard words about love and commitment, but it was the vows Tessa and Caleb had written themselves that made everyone cry. Caleb spoke first, his voice rough but steady. "I promise to show up for you every day, even when it's hard. I promise to hold you through the grief and celebrate you through the joy. I promise to honor Eli's memory and to build a life that would make him proud. And I promise to love you, broken pieces, bad days and all, for as long as I'm breathing." Tessa's turn. She looked at Caleb through tears and said, "I promise to let you love me, even when I feel unworthy of it. I promise to be honest about the hard days and to share the good ones. I promise to love Mia like she's mine, and to build a family that's big enough for all our memories. And I promise to keep living, really living, because that's what Eli wanted, and that's what you taught me how to do again." When the officiant pronounced them married, Caleb kissed her like they were the only two people in the world, and somewhere in the back of Tessa's mind, she could almost hear Eli's laugh. The reception was held at a small restaurant in town. Nothing fancy, just good food and people who loved them. Mia gave a speech she'd written herself about how happy she was to have a mom now, which made Tessa sob into her napkin. Marcus told embarrassing stories about Caleb from the shop. Tessa's aunt, who'd flown in from Montana, toasted to new beginnings and second chances. And when they cut the cake, chocolate with vanilla frosting, because it had been Eli's favorite, Tessa made sure to save a piece to leave at his grave the next morning. Life after the wedding settled into something that felt remarkably normal. Caleb worked at the shop. Tessa continued her job with hospice families, finding purpose in the work even when it broke her heart. Mia thrived in school and started bringing home straight A's she was immensely proud of. They were a family, not in the traditional sense, not in the way anyone would have predicted, but in the way that mattered, showing up for each other, choosing each other, loving each other through the hard parts. There were still bad days, days when Tessa couldn't get out of bed because the grief was too heavy, days when Caleb worked himself to exhaustion trying to provide for them, days when Mia asked questions about death and loss that had no good answers. But there were good days too. More of them than Tessa had thought possible. Days of laughter at the dinner table and movie nights on the couch. Days of small victories and quiet joys. Days that reminded her that loving someone didn't mean forgetting someone else, that there was room in her heart for both the grief and the happiness. 2 years after the wedding, on a warm summer evening, Tessa realized she was late. Not just a few days late, 3 weeks late, which never happened. She took a pregnancy test in the bathroom while Caleb was putting Mia to bed, her hands shaking so badly she could barely read the result. When 2 lines appeared, she had to sit down on the edge of the tub to process it. She was pregnant. The revelation brought a tidal wave of emotions: joy, terror, guilt, hope, all of them crashing into her at once. She thought about Eli, about how she'd never get to have another child with him, never get to give him a sibling. The guilt tried to drown her. How could she be happy about this when Eli was gone? But then she thought about his letter, about his plea for her to keep living, to be happy. And she thought about Caleb and Mia and the family they'd built together, and she let herself feel the joy. When Caleb came to find her, she was still sitting on the edge of the tub, the test in her hands. "Tessa, you okay?" She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, and held out the test. Caleb stared at it for a long moment. Then he sank down beside her, pulling her into his arms. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. "I'm terrified." "That's not what I asked." Tessa pressed her face against his shoulder. "Yes, I'm happy. Is that okay?" "It's more than okay." Caleb kissed the top of her head. "It's perfect." They told Mia the next morning over pancakes. She was quiet for a moment, processing, and then she asked the most important question. "Will they like dinosaurs?" Caleb laughed. "I don't know. Maybe." "Good, because I have a lot to teach them." The pregnancy was harder than Tessa expected. Every doctor's appointment triggered memories of Eli's illness. Every scan made her hold her breath, waiting for bad news. But the baby was healthy, growing right on schedule, and slowly Tessa let herself believe this might actually happen. She gave birth in February. A girl, 7 pounds and perfect, with Caleb's dark hair and a cry that could wake the whole hospital floor. They named her Grace, after Caleb's late wife, and after the grace that had brought them all together. When Tessa held her daughter for the first time, she cried. But they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of gratitude, of wonder, of love so overwhelming it felt like it might crack her ribs. Mia was obsessed with her new sister from day one. She'd rush home from school to hold her, helped with diaper changes, sang songs she made up about dinosaurs and baby sisters. And Tessa watched this child who'd lost a friend and gained a family navigate it all with remarkable emotional intelligence. One night, when Grace was 3 months old and finally sleeping through the night, Tessa found Mia sitting on the floor of the nursery, just watching the baby sleep. "Hey, sweetheart, what are you doing up?" "Just making sure she's okay." Tessa sat down beside her. "She's okay. I promise." "I know. I just like watching her." Mia was quiet for a moment. "Do you think Eli knows about her?" "I think so. I bet he's happy. I bet he wanted you to have another baby so you wouldn't be so sad anymore." Tessa pulled Mia into her lap, even though she was getting too big for it. "I think you're right, and I think he'd be really proud of you, being such a good big sister." "I'm good at it. You're the best at it." They sat like that for a while, watching Grace sleep, and Tessa felt the weight of everything they'd survived pressing against her chest, but lighter now, bearable, transformed into something that felt almost like peace. 5 years passed. Grace grew into a boisterous toddler who did, despite Mia's best efforts, show no interest in dinosaurs but loved dancing and making up songs. Mia started middle school and joined the science club. Caleb finally got promoted to shop manager with a salary that meant they could move to a slightly bigger apartment. And Tessa continued her work with hospice families, carrying Eli's memory into every conversation, every family she helped navigate the impossible. On what would have been Eli's 12th birthday, they all went to the cemetery together. Grace toddled between Caleb and Tessa, holding both their hands, while Mia carried the flowers they'd picked up on the way. The headstone was weathered now, softened by years of snow and rain, but the Spider-Man engraving was still visible. Tessa knelt down and placed the flowers. Bright sunflowers, because Eli had loved anything bright. "Hi, baby," she said softly. "We brought someone to meet you. This is Grace, your sister, kind of. She's 5 now and she's wild and beautiful and so full of life. I think you would have liked her." Grace looked at the headstone with curiosity. "Who's Eli?" "He was my son," Tessa said, "a long time ago, before you were born." "Where is he?" "He died, sweetheart. He got very sick and his body stopped working. But we remember him, and we love him, and we visit him here." Grace considered this with the seriousness only a 5-year-old could muster. Then she reached out and patted the headstone. "Hi, Eli. I'm your sister. Mom says you liked superheroes. My favorite is Wonder Woman." Tessa's throat closed up. Beside her, Caleb slipped his arm around her waist. Mia knelt down next to Grace. "I knew Eli," she said. "He was my friend, and he was really brave." They stayed for an hour, talking and remembering and just being together. When they finally left, Grace turned back and waved at the grave. "Bye, Eli. We'll come back soon." In the truck on the way home, Tessa leaned her head against Caleb's shoulder and watched the mountains fade into the distance behind them. "Do you ever think about how different things would be if we hadn't met?" she asked quietly. "All the time. Do you think we would have found each other anyway, in some other life?" Caleb thought about it. "I don't know, maybe, but I'm glad we didn't have to wait for another life to find out." Tessa smiled. "Me too." That night, after the girls were asleep and the apartment was quiet, Caleb and Tessa sat on their balcony with glasses of wine, looking out at the city lights. "We made it," Tessa said softly. "Yeah, we did. It wasn't supposed to work. Single dad, grieving mother, all that trauma. We should have crashed and burned. But we didn't. No, we didn't." Tessa turned to look at him. "Thank you. For sitting down beside me that night. For not walking away when things got hard. For loving me when I couldn't love myself." "You don't have to thank me for that." "I do, though, because you saved my life. You and Mia both." Caleb pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You saved ours too. You just didn't realize it." They sat like that until late into the night. Two people who'd been strangers on Valentine's Day 8 years ago and were now a family, holding each other against the cold and the dark and everything the world could throw at them. Life wasn't perfect. Money was still tight. Grief still struck without warning, and there were days when everything felt too hard. But they had each other. They had Mia and Grace. They had memories of the people they'd lost and hope for the future they were building. And on the good days, the ones that came more often now, Tessa would think about that night in the diner, when a stranger sat down beside her and refused to let her drown. She'd think about Eli's letter, begging her to keep living. And she'd think about how love, real love, wasn't about perfection or timing or having all the answers. It was about showing up, staying, choosing each other again and again, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. And in the end, that was enough.